Alright, welcome to part 3. This time I'm talking about the different classes available in D&D, and really I just want you to completely ignore the prestige classes. Those are not important until you've actually played a bunch, and really they're only for higher levels anyways. There's also NPC classes over here, and if you're a masochist, these are a great lot of fun. Otherwise, yeah, just don't play Commoner. Just don't. So, we're going to look at the base classes. There's all kinds here as we ignore the ads, and we're going to go to just walk through them one at a time. Barbarian's really the first one we'll start with. So this is where I mentioned in the first video that you have a hit die that, oh, whoops, I guess we're looking at Call of Duty now. You have a hit die. You also have alignment. I guess we're really just going everywhere. Let's start from the top here. You have all kinds of stuff that you can work with a class. You've got your Barbarian here, for example. You get your title. You get your alignment, so you can only play non-lawful characters, so they can be neutral or chaotic of whatever you want, good or evil or neutral. And you've also got hit die. Hit die is your health, as I mentioned before, to get your hit points. For example, with the Barbarian, you're getting your 12 hit points here, as you can see by the D12, and you're adding on your Constitution modifier. I'm not going to really explain that every single time that I go through, so really, that's how you get hit points. You roll that dice there, and that's going to give you your hit points for that level, except for first level, where you get your maximum. Class skills. Every class has certain skills that they're good at. The way that we use this is that, for example, a Barbarian has climb, craft, handle animals, intimidate, jump, listen, ride, survival, and swim. Basically, all of these here you can put your maximum number of ranks into. When you're looking at the character sheet, you have that big old intimidating chunk here, and in that you've got, as you go along, you've got your skill name, key ability, skill modifier, which is basically the total. You've got your ability modifier, so whatever your ability score modifier is. And then you've got ranks. What this matters is with ranks. When you have your class skills, you can put a certain number of ranks into that class if you have that as a class skill. So at first level, if you are talking about a class skill, you can put a maximum of 4 ranks into it. You also have things, if they're not a class skill, you can only put a maximum of 2 ranks into it. There's also different types of skills. You'll see that when you're looking at them. Skills with a black square next to them. For example, you have appraise. These ones here, you can use these skills untrained. So even if it's not a class skill, you can still use it, and you can invest points in it. But if it's not a class skill, you can't put a maximum amount of ranks into it. You can only put 2 if it's not a class skill, and if it is a class skill, you can put 4. There are certain ones, say like sleight of hand, for example, that you can't use untrained. So if it's not a class skill, you simply can't even invest ranks in it, and you can't use that skill. You have skill points per level. For example, with a Barbarian, you get 4 plus your intelligence modifier. This means that, we'll talk about first level. So at first level, you get 4 plus your intelligence modifier. Say, for example, you have 12 intelligence, you get a +1 modifier. You have 4 plus 1, and then times that whole number by 4. So you have 20 skill points available. And you can assign those to your ranks. That's the only area you're putting these skill points. And as I said, first level, 4 is the maximum amount of ranks you can put into a class skill, 2 for non-class skills. And then you get more skill points at each level. So for a class skill, that goes up by 1 each level. For non-class skills, it goes up by 0.5. So the maximum number of ranks is a little bit slower for non-class skills. Class features. This is what really makes your class unique. As you can see, you get this big old table here that gives you a good idea of what you can do at each level. For a Barbarian, basically you've got faster movement, rage, and illiteracy. Illiteracy is actually a class skill per se. You can spend skill points to become literate, but yeah, you can't actually read a language right off the bat as a Barbarian. Rage, for example, this is an extraordinary ability. You have at the end, at the second page of your character sheet, a whole lot of different things that you can work with. I put it under special abilities, is where I put any class skills. That way you know what your class does, but I also just like to keep a like a separate document or separate piece of paper where I write down all this stuff, so I also know what the ability does. And every time you level up, you often get some new skills. For example, you get something called Uncanny Dodge. All of this is going to be available in the player's handbook, so you'll know what you'll get at each level. So that's enough on how to kind of interpret a different a character or a class. I should also mention too that you have your base attack bonus. You also have your fort save, reflex save, and will save. Remember in the first video I talked about how each class has different strengths. With the Barbarian, for example, you have a much higher fortitude save than other classes. But your reflex save and your will save are rather weak, but your base attack bonus is also quite good too, so you're more likely to hit. And yeah, every time you gain a level, you roll your hit dice again, and you add on your Constitution modifier. Whatever the result is, that's the additional hit points you have. You gain skill points per level as well too. So now with that kind of over with how to understand a different class, let's talk about the different classes themselves. So Barbarians, they are your classic tanks. They do a lot of damage, they can eat up a lot of damage, and they're really the frontline fighters. They go out and they beat stuff up. They have high strength, they often have high constitution and decent dexterity, but any kind of mental score like intelligence, wisdom, and charisma aren't necessarily as important. So this is going to be kind of where I walk through like what you want to really invest in when you're choosing where your ability scores should go so they best suit your character. If you wrote down those ability scores rather than just dumping them in right away, this is where you can basically say, oh, I'm a barbarian, well I want to have a high strength and I want to have a high constitution. I'll have my dexterity be like my third highest, and the rest is just dump stats. It doesn't really matter what the other ones are. Now we'll move on to the next class. Bards. These are kind of a sneaky and more of a support type class. They are also in the same way that Barbarians, they can't be lawful, they have to be neutral or chaotic, but their hit dice is significantly weaker. They're quite squishy, they can get beaten up quite easily. So you'll roll a d6 when you're doing health, but again, at first level, you just take the maximum value, so 6 plus your constitution modifier to get your hit points. Your class skills, these, you can see that the Bard has significantly more that they can work with. A lot of these are also ones that you have to be trained in. So as a Bard, they can use a lot of things like sleight of hand that, say, a Barbarian can't. They also get more skill points per level, and because intelligence is a little bit more important, they're also just going to get more skill points overall. You can see, though, that they don't have a particularly high base attack bonus, so they're going to have... they're not going to hit as often, but they do have a better reflex save and will save, so they're going to be able to dodge out of the way of things more often. They're going to have a better likelihood of resisting mental effects as well. And their big thing is that they can play music. Music is kind of inspiring. It can also distract, so you get a nice mix of things here. They can also cast spells, which are their own bag of worms. You have your 0th level spells, which is kind of the thing that a lot of players try and wrap their head around first. These are basically your really weak kinds of spells that are kind of gimmicks, really. You've got Prestidigitation that can be used as like a little bit of utility, but once you get to like 1st through to like 6th level spells, these are actually things that have much more substantial effects. Now this is where the spells known as spells per day really, combined with their ability to use music, their most important scores are probably going to be just charisma first. That's going to be your most important one. Dexterity is useful, constitution is useful, intelligence is useful. I would probably go charisma first. Probably put constitution or dexterity as my second, and then the other one third, and then maybe just dump strength, and the rest can go wherever you want. So I wouldn't really bother with strength that much. I'd focus more on dexterity. You'll also notice that each class has weapon and armor proficiencies. A Barbarian, for example, can basically use any type of weapon, except for exotic weapons. A Bard can use all simple weapons, but they can't use all of the martial weapons in the same way that a Barbarian can. So they've got a variety they can use here. They also have proficiency in light armor and shields. Barbarians, for example, can use medium armor, so they can use a little bit heavier stuff. Bards cannot quite use as much armor as a barbarian could, for example. Interestingly, though, unlike other spellcasters, bards can wear light armor without having any kind of arcane spell failure. When you're casting a spell, there's kind of like intricate hand movements and verbal cues and things like that you need to use. Oftentimes, like a sorcerer or a wizard, they don't use armor because it messes with those movements. That makes it so they have a chance to fail when they cast those spells. So that's something to keep in mind when you're choosing armor for a character. But with bards, as long as they're wearing light armor, they're not going to incur any penalties for using it, and they're not going to incur any penalties for casting spells. Moving on to the next one, clerics. Clerics are quite interesting. So this is our first divine caster. It's really important to know what your deity is when you're playing a cleric, because their alignment must be within one step. So for example, like it says here, if you're playing, say, a character that has a neutral good god, for example, a cleric of Pelor, they can only be lawful good, neutral good, or chaotic good. They can't be anything out of further away from neutral good. They are actually, despite having this D8 size dice for hit dice, they are quite tanky because they can wear heavy armor. They can also use a lot of different types of weapons. Their class skills, they've got a nice variety here, and this would be a good chance to talk about craft, for example. Craft, profession, and knowledge all have different mini parts underneath that they can use. So you can see here with knowledge, there's knowledge arcana, knowledge history, knowledge religion, knowledge planes. So there's a variety of knowledge skills that are often important for different classes. And sometimes you'll see knowledge all skills, which basically you can choose any of the knowledge skills to have ranks in. Same with profession. Profession and craft, actually, you can pretty much choose anything from like being a cobbler making shoes to making weapons and armor, so like a weaponsmith or an armor smith. Profession is basically any kind of like small job you could do, like if you're a sailor, that's a profession. But it's more about just making money, whereas craft is actually about making items. Clerics are probably one of the more complex classes here. You'll see that they have domains and class skills. Domains are basically the special things you'll see under the under their like character page in the player's handbook. And if you want to play cleric, I really recommend you read carefully through the class because they are quite a bit more complex than, say, a fighter or a barbarian or a bard. There's only you have to basically choose domains that are allowed by your god, which will say in the player's handbook, and this will heavily impact how your character plays because you get a bonus spell based on these domains. As for the actual like cleric themselves, you can see their things they gain every time are not super complex. Their base attack bonus is okay, their fortitude save is great, their will save is great, their reflex save is it leaves something to be desired. But they do get the ability to turn and rebuke undead, so they're very good at fighting undead. And they are a full caster, which means they can get a large amount of spells. And they're very good utility casters. They're more of a support character that doesn't lash out and do a lot of damage, but they're very good at helping their team. As you can see, they're proficient in all simple weapons and all types of armor, and with shields. So they're very tanky. They can wear heavy armor like full plate and have a heavy shield that helps them be very hard to hit. And you can see that they're very situational depending on the deity's alignment. So if you have a lawful good deity, you're going to have a lawful good alignment. As for spells, you are restricted based on your alignment. So you can't cast chaotic aligned spells if you are a lawful cleric. So this really goes into a lot of detail on how a cleric performs. I'd recommend reading through this very carefully if you're going to play this class, and also reading the entry in the player's handbook as well. As for the Druid, Druids take it up another step further. Druids are probably one of the most complex classes in the game, but they're also really, really fun to play. As you can see, they are restricted to what alignments they can play. They always have to be some element of neutral, and this kind of reflects their connection to nature. As for hit dice, this is also a little misleading. The D8, they can also do a whole bunch of other witchcraft stuff that makes them a lot more tanky. So they do have that D8 hit dice, but it can be quite a lot more tough than that. As for their Oh, actually, one thing I should talk about the Cleric real quick, because I kind of messed up on that. Wisdom is your most important thing. Every caster has a particular thing that they base their spells on. For a Cleric, it's Wisdom. Same with a Druid. This makes their spells harder to resist when somebody is affected by it, and it also makes it so they can get more bonus spells, so they can cast more spells of higher levels. So back to Druid. Druids, as you can see, they've got a mixture of spells that are different skills they can use. It's not super robust, but it's a lot of very good skills. Decent skill points per day. Base attack bonus, it's okay. Fortitude save and reflex save are good. And they get a lot of different things they gain each level, and their spells per day are very useful. They're also support spells like the Cleric, and it's a wide variety of spells they can draw from. As for their weapon armor proficiencies, basically you can't really use anything metal. You have to keep it within this idea of being natural and connected to nature. So you can use limited amounts of metal, so like a scimitar and a sickle and a short spear, there is some metal in that, but they can't wear metal armor. They have to wear something that is made of like natural elements. So it's like padded leather, leather armor, and hide armor. As for their spells, this would be a good thing to point out that different types of casters have to either prepare their spells ahead of time or they can cast them spontaneously. So you could see earlier that in the Bard, they had their spells known. Well, Druids and Clerics and Wizards don't have that. They have a spell book or some kind of tome or just latent knowledge of spells, but they have to prepare them ahead of time before actually really starting the day. So you have a certain number of spells per day that you can cast, but they have to basically lock them in when they prepare them. And every 24 hours, a caster will replenish their ability to, as long as you have an 8-hour rest, you replenish your ability to cast all of your spells. But after you've casted the max number of spells of each slot, for example, at level 1, you can only cast one first level spell. Once you've casted that, you don't get it until you've had 8 hours to rest and then prepare a new spell. Yeah. As you can also see, there is a similar thing where they can't cast spells of an opposed alignment, and they also get a bonus language of Sylvan. They also get an animal companion too, which is really useful. This makes them quite a versatile character. I really enjoy playing Druids. I think they're a lot of fun. They also get some skill bonuses, but yeah, they're one of those classes that you really need to read through everything to understand what you can do and what you can't do. And you'll find that with a lot of these, you really need to just read your class and understand it. And that's kind of the general advice I give for players, is just read the player's handbook. But this will give you a basic idea of what you can do. Fighters are probably one of the most simple characters. They can be any alignment, they're fairly tanky with a d10 hit dice, and they've got a nice number of skills that are useful, but they're not like game-changing. They get a nice base attack bonus, they get a nice fortitude save, reflex save is whatever, and will save is whatever. But they also get bonus feats. They can be specialized into a lot of different weapons to make them very good with those weapons. They're proficient with all simple and martial weapons, so they can use a lot of different things, and they basically pick up and use whatever's around. They're also proficient with all armor, including tower shields, which is kind of unique. As for bonus feats, you can see that there is a special list of feats that they can use. This whole selection here. And basically this will allow your fighter to specialize. I'll talk about feats a little bit more in a following video. Next up, you got the monk. Monks are martial characters, but they're more dexterity based. Whereas with the fighter, you're going to want to specialize and put a lot of things into strength, dexterity, and constitution. Monk, you kind of need to invest in everything. You'll see that you need to have a high wisdom score, but you also need to have like a decent dexterity score and a decent constitution score, while also having good strength. And kind of just dumping intelligence and charisma and just praying that you have enough in each of these things to be viable. They're a little bit on the underpowered side, but they're very flexible, and they have a lot of utility. Like, they can attack a lot more often than a lot of classes right away. I also like to just generally recommend that their base attack bonus be the same as a fighter's. So they got a nice mixture of scores and skills to work with, and they have a lot of different things they can do. They are actually an unarmored type of character. They run around and They're just very agile. Rather than trying to eat up a hit with armor, they instead just dodge out of the way. And that's what this AC bonus is there. They just get a nice flat bonus based on their wisdom modifier, and they also get a bonus based on their level. So if you are high enough level as a monk, you will get higher AC. You also get a nice little speed bonus, which is good too, and all kinds of other varied skills. They also get strong fortitude saves, reflex saves, and will saves, which helps make up for the fact they can't wear armor, and really when they're attacking, they're using their hands and their legs to fight. So they've got a special unarmed situation. They're really quite a quirky class that I enjoy playing, but they're not exactly super powerful, but they're very versatile. As for paladins are basically like the mixture of like fighters and clerics combined together. You've got all kinds of stuff based around being a good character, and you really are only stuck in it lawful good. There's some variants that allow you to play different extreme alignments as well too, but the classic paladin is lawful good. They're righteous, they're tanky, and they've got a nice mixture of skills that help them kind of fulfill this role. Their skills are not particularly, like, they don't have a whole lot of skill points, but they're very good kind of fighting and defending type class with good fortitude save, weak reflex, weak will. But they also get some bonuses like Divine Grace that gives them a huge buff to all of those based on their charisma. Same with fighters. They've got a wide variety of weapons available to them, and they can use all types of armor except for tower shields. And they get like an aura of good and things like that. And they can also get a pet later on as well. They've got some healing abilities, and they've also got some abilities to make people more immune to fear effects. So they're a good kind of support and defender type character with also a good bit of output of damage with Smite Evil. As for the next one here, we've got Rangers. Rangers are kind of like the mixture of fighter and druid. They're more of the dexterity based kind of character. They've got a decent amount of health, but they're not exactly super tanky because they can't wear heavier armor. They're actually restricted to just light armor and some shields. They have a good mixture of weapons they can use, but generally they go into two categories, as you can see with their combat style. Here's their second thing, which generally puts them into a tree of being either ranged, as per the name Ranger comes from, in a way. They also can dual wield weapons, which allows them to, in the same way that a monk can attack a lot, so can a ranger once it gets high enough level. They also have a limited number of spells per day. They're kind of a mixture of, a druid and a fighter, with some benefits there, and the ability to have an animal companion. They have a good base attack bonus, good fortitude and reflex, but weak will. So you'll find these... Oh, and another thing. The thing that really stands out about them is the ranger's favorite enemy. This allows you to get this kind of like stacking bonus against a particular enemy of your choosing. So you can get bonuses on some skills against them that get really quite strong as you level up. And you also get increases on damage rolls against them. So you do more damage to these types of enemies because you know them better. Overall, fun class, quite diverse. You'll find that each character or each class has kind of a gimmick. And with the ranger, it's the ability to hunt particular enemies. And often they're more range based, so they're going to use a lot of bows. So elves fit into this role pretty well. Rogues are really kind of the skill monkey. They have a lot of skills they can use, as you can see here. And they also get a lot of skill points, but they're not particularly squishy. Or no, they're quite squishy, but they're not very tanky. Their alignment can be anything, but generally tend towards chaotic. Their base attack bonus is, it's the same as like a cleric and a monk. It's okay. Their fortitude is not particularly good, but their reflex is quite good, and their will save is rather weak. But they get sneak attack, which allows them to, when an enemy is unable to either, they don't know they're there, so they're flat-footed, that allows you to get bonus damage whenever you hit. And this is for each hit that you make. So when you're high enough level, you can make multiple attacks, or if you're dual wielding, you can make multiple attacks. They're also able to find traps, and they're also able to evade better, so they're less prone to actually getting hit by things like fireball or getting hit by traps. They can also find their traps for their allies and disable them. As for weapons, they've got a nice mixture. They can use all simple weapons, plus a variety of kind of more unique weapons as well, like the hand crossbow, which is more of a utility than like a really heavy damage dealer. They don't have any kind of shield proficiency, and they're good with light armor, but they can't use anything heavier. And you wouldn't want to either, because it would make a lot of their skills harder to use, and or just completely obviates the ability to use things like evasion. They have otherwise a very good set of skills for working in dungeons, and it's really good to have a character like this in each party. Last up is probably two of my favorites, and also probably the two most complex. This is the Sorcerers and the Wizards. You'll find that these characters can be really any alignment, but they're not durable. These guys are always at the back. They only have 4 as a hit dice, so they're not going to be able to take much damage. As for the class skills, it may look like they don't have very much, and that's because they don't have very much in terms of class skills. They don't get that many skill points, and they're really only good in a couple of key areas. Like for the Sorcerer, they really don't have much that they can do for skills, but it's really based around magic. And you can see that their base attack bonus is weak. They're not very good in melee and at ranged. They don't have very good fortitude saves. They don't have good reflex saves. But they have a good will save and the ability to summon a familiar, which is like a weaker version of the Druid's big pet. But what really is something that makes them special is their ability to cast spells. And it's not restricted like the Druid or the Cleric or the Paladin or the Ranger, which are more support-based. These are the really flashy things, and they're very diverse, and they fall into a bunch of different categories, from like evocation, where you summon like fireballs and other kinds of destructive spells, to summoning spells, to defensive spells, to a little bit of everything. So they hit a lot of niches, and while they look kind of pathetically weak, they're actually probably the most powerful class in the game. And really beyond 6th level is where they start to get completely nuts. So you'll also find in a later video I talk about Epic 6, which is a variant of the game that caps players off at level 6 and has some special rules for advancement afterwards. But yes, Sorcerers are charisma based. You basically want to max out that charisma score and then try and make up for your weakness by investing a lot of points into constitution and dexterity. That way you're not going to get slapped around by a house cat. As for weapon proficiencies, you are available to use all simple weapons, which includes crossbows, thankfully. So you can pretty much always take a crossbow as a sorcerer, so you can have some form of attacking that will not put you in melee. They can't use armor or shields, though, and you wouldn't want to. This is where you have that arcane spell failure, where different armors and shields will increase your chance of a spell failing. So, for example, full plate restricts your movement a fair bit in this game, and therefore would make it a lot more difficult to use those fine motor skills that actually allow you to cast spells. But yeah, when you cast a spell, basically some spells will require they have a difficulty class. So the higher the spell level and the relevant stat, such as for a sorcerer, charisma is that one that makes it much more difficult to resist spells and gives you more spells known. So you really want to max out that that score. You also have all kinds of critters you can have as your familiar. As you can see, they have their own small bonuses. They're not end of the world or super game changing. It's really depending on what you kind of want. You can also have like variants of this, like you can have like a small dog instead of a cat too, or just whatever the DM will allow you. You could also have like a crow instead of a raven. Wizards. So unlike sorcerers, which are spontaneous casters, spontaneous casters they have a small number of spells known, as you can see here, but they can cast them whenever they want, and they don't need to prepare them in advance. Whereas wizards and the other spellcasters I mentioned before, except for bards, wizards, moving on to them, they have to prepare their spells in advance. And they have less spells they can cast at a time, but they also have some special tricks that I will talk about in a moment. Wizards are very similar to sorcerers. They're basically the exact same class, except for basically more spells and having to prepare versus cast them spontaneously with a small number of spells. And wizards work on intelligence instead. So they do have generally more skills they can use, and they can also have knowledge in basically anything. So as you can see, there's all kinds of different knowledge areas you can work with that change how the spell or how the skill works. And when you actually look at the wizard's ability to do stuff, they have Summon Familiar and Scribe Scroll. These are kind of more like a crafting type caster. Scribe Scroll allows you to basically prepare any spell you want in a scroll as an item and then cast it whenever. But their spells per day are less, and they have to prepare them in advance. But the benefit you get is a humongous variety of spells you can draw from. So if you're able to prepare more advance, and you know generally what the characters are going to be fighting up against, you can then prepare the relevant spells. And you'll have, at other times, you'll be able to prepare more utility spells that are much more useful. They're terrible in combat physically, and they don't have very good fortitude or saves or reflex saves, but they have good will saves. They also get some bonus feats in the Summon Familiar as well. Their main thing is based on intelligence, unlike Charisma, which is the Sorcerer stat, and it works the same way as resisting spells as the Sorcerer is. They can also specialize in different schools. So you can see there's a bunch of different, types of classes of spells. So you can see Abjuration is about protecting, Conjuration is about summoning, Divination is about revealing information, Enchantment is about some special properties. It's quite a small school. Evocation is about basically blowing stuff up. That's Evocation. Illusions, Alter Perception, False Images. It's a very diverse school. I quite like Illusion. Necromancy, working with life forces, summoning the dead, skeletons. Transmutation is really quite a lot of fun. You can literally change how something's shaped and use things like Polymorph, which is the signature ability of the Druid, which I didn't cover earlier, but really makes them a bit insane. And then Universal. This is a weird mixture of spells that really anybody can learn. It's very niche, but you can't specialize in it. And specializing basically allows you to get extra spells at the cost of not being able to cast spells of a particular school. And I think that pretty much covers most of what you would need to know about all the classes. I'll leave the reference for this page here, which will give you everything you need to know about each class, and then again, Player's Handbook will have all this information as well. But I hope this gives a useful overview. And just to reiterate, because I didn't mention it for some classes, Barbarians, max out Strength, Dexterity, and Constitution. Bards, max out Charisma, Dexterity, and Constitution are useful as well too. Cleric, Wisdom. Make Wisdom your best stat. Charisma is also good as a second because you need that for turning undead. And then Constitution as your last one because you want to make sure you have a lot of health because clerics are good defenders. Druids, put stuff into Wisdom. You can actually kind of dump your physical scores a whole lot. I tend to as well because when you polymorph, it ignores whatever your previous physical skills were, like Strength, Dexterity, Constitution. Fighters, ignore the mental ones like Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. Just go for the physical stats. Generally, I just max out Strength if I'm doing a lot of melee, or Dexterity if I'm doing a lot of ranged. And then Constitution, depending on how I'm setting it up. If I'm in front line, do more Constitution. Monks, generally try and put Wisdom fairly high up there. That's going to improve how well your not spells, but your abilities for the monk perform. But also then Constitution and Dexterity are quite important as well. I would generally try and focus more on Dexterity than Strength. It's a bit more versatile. And also by having Constitution, Dexterity, and Wisdom all really high, your already good saves are going to make you basically immune to a lot of effects. Paladins, max out. It's going to have a similar situation as monks, but I would generally work with your kind of more defensive abilities like your Constitution. But I was also thinking you should probably put a little bit more into Wisdom and then really max out Charisma. Charisma is probably the most important for a Paladin, and also just makes it more fun to roleplay as well too. It's kind of like playing like Prince Charming or something like that, while also being very righteous and full of virtue. The Ranger, this depends which way you want to go. If I would generally put Dexterity as probably one of the most important ones here. It's going to be the most useful. And then some points into Wisdom as well so you can cast spells, but really it's up to you. You can kind of do whatever you want with a Ranger. Rogues, Intelligence, and Dexterity are going to be your best friends. Also a little bit into Charisma. And then lastly, Sorcerers and Wizards. I would max out their respective spellcasting. So sorcerers max out charisma, wizards max out intelligence, and then try and make them a little less squishy with better constitution and better dexterity. You'll notice that I very rarely said to do much with wisdom except for like the druids and the clerics and monks, because those all really rely on wisdom for their special abilities and spells. It's because wisdom generally doesn't have a whole lot of things it's connected to. Even for your skills, like it's a little bit useful for trying to like detect things. It's kind of like your ability to sense the area around you and be knowledgeable of it. But a lot of the other classes, they can just dump it. Like if you already have a weak will save, you're probably not going to do that much better by dumping a bunch of stuff into wisdom, where it could be better spent on other ability scores you have. So my general rule of thumb, unless you're playing a character that relies on wisdom for a lot of its abilities, just dump it. But yeah, a quick note though on prestige classes, these are more or less only accessible after 5th level, so things already kind of get crazy by then, and they allow a bit more specialization. They're really quite unique, and if you are going to be playing in a campaign where you can actually use these, I would recommend it. They're a lot of fun. They spice up the character a lot, and just generally makes everybody a little bit more unique when they take a prestige class. But in 9 times out of 10, you're either not going to be playing at that level, or it's just good enough to use the base classes. So yeah, that hopefully covers everything you might need to know on classes in D&D 3.5. I'll probably make some amendments here to the video at a later point. Yeah, that's everything for classes. I'll follow up with a video on feats and skills in a last couple of videos. But yeah, thanks for watching.